Fusion has the potential to provide clean, safe, and abundant energy for the entire world. In fusion research, my colleagues and I try to harness the process at the heart of the sun as a safe and sustainable form of low-carbon emission energy production. Fusion devices, or tokamaks, heat hydrogen to very high temperatures, up to 150 million degrees. This is 10 times hotter than in the center of the sun. Those temperatures make hydrogen particles collide so fast that they can fuse together to form a helium ion and a neutron. This process releases a lot of heat, which is what we then can turn into electricity or use directly in industry. The fusion fuel is abundant everywhere on Earth, so our fuels are the hydrogen isotopes deuterium from seawater and tritium, which we will have to create ourselves out of the metal lithium. Developing the technology to do so efficiently is part of the ongoing research in Europe's fusion labs. A fusion reactor uses magnetic fields to keep the very hot plasma away from the walls of the device. So these have to be made of the right materials to withstand such extreme conditions. We also have a variety of systems with which we can control the plasma and also measure what happens inside our device. Europe has a number of fusion devices. They're all working together. JET in the UK is the only fusion device that currently can use the fuel of the future fusion reactors, namely deuterium and tritium, and recently set a world fusion energy record of 59 megajoules of fusion energy. The international experiment ITER, which is currently being built in France, will be the first to produce more heat from fusion than needed to sustain the reactions. In parallel, we are already thinking ahead. We are designing the demonstration fusion power plant demo, which will show how we will deliver fusion electricity to the grid. To make fusion a reality, all of Europe's experts have joined forces under the EUROfusion consortium to coordinate the research along the European fusion roadmap. 29 members, these are research organizations in 31 countries in the EU, plus the United Kingdom, Switzerland, and Ukraine. Together, they connect another 150 education partners, university groups, and companies to our research program. EUROfusion is made possible through grants from the European Commission, through the Euratom framework, and this allows us, for example, to use each other's experimental facilities or to set up working groups to tackle challenges that no single member would be able to handle on their own. In the past years, EUROfusion has been reaching new frontiers in our understanding of fusion plasmas, and that all in preparation of ITER and demo. Our unique experiments with deuterium and tritium in our JET facility at the end of last year did not only set a world fusion energy record, they also brought together over 2 decades of advancements in fusion science, materials, technology for a true test of the progress made in fusion energy research. But EUROfusion is also looking into the future. Our efforts along the EUROfusion roadmap are all aimed to support ITER and to realize a demonstration fusion power plant demo, working with European organizations and companies to build up the industry that will build the energy of the future.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Francesco Cappelletti, Policy and Research Officer at the European Liberal Forum, where today we are honored to guest Tonny Donné, the CEO of the EUROfusion consortium. And I would like to start, can you tell us where do we stand with the fusion energy and producing energy from the fusion reaction?
Actually, we are in a very interesting time in fusion because if we just look at last year, we have a new world record fusion energy generation. We did that at the Joint European Torus in the UK. It's a European device. And there we generated 59 megajoule of fusion energy. It doesn't sound very much, but we could make that with only 170 microgram of fuel. And if you would like to do the same with fossil fuels, you would need 4 kilograms of coal or 1 kilogram of natural gas. So we have shown with this experiment that fusion is plausible. We are now at the same time working together as Europe, together with the United States, Russia, Japan, South Korea, India and China on ITER. ITER will be the next step device, and 80% of the device is ready by now. It is built in southern France. And ITER will show that for the first time we can create more energy than we put in. So ITER will get 500 megawatt of fusion power versus 15 megawatt put in.
Anything that is related to nuclear is somehow difficult to talk about in the policy sphere because there are very different views on things, and especially when it comes to nuclear fission. So let's take just 30 seconds to explain the main differences, if you don't mind, between what we have now, nuclear fission, which is scientifically nowadays the only greenhouse-free source in Europe for baseload energy, and what is the main differences between fission and nuclear fusion once it will be realized fully.
Yeah, so in both cases we generate electricity from mass. So and that sounds very abstract. It's the famous relation ESMC squared, which almost everyone knows, although maybe many people don't know what it actually means. But what happens is, well, let me start with fission. With fission, you start with a very large, heavy nucleus like uranium and plutonium. You shoot one neutron on it, and this atom splits in some smaller parts, also a lot of neutrons. And if you put the masses of all these atoms, which are the product, on a scale, then you will see that you have lost mass. And this mass is converted into energy. And this is used for energy generation. With fusion, we do exactly the opposite. We have very light masses, and typically in our reactors we use isotopes, so actually forms of hydrogen, deuterium and tritium, which are heavy hydrogen and super heavy hydrogen. We merge them together to helium, and also there we create a lot of energy. So this is fusion. Now, if it comes to the differences with fission, one is our fuel is basically deuterium and tritium. And tritium doesn't occur in nature. It's a radioactive isotope of hydrogen. We need to create it in the reactor, and we create it from lithium. Lithium is not radioactive. Deuterium we take from ordinary water. So our fuel is totally not radioactive, and the power density fusion is enormous. If we would have a 2 gigawatt electric fusion plant, which is as big as, let's say, the largest fossil plants we have now working, you would need only 500 kilogram of deuterium and lithium. The reactor is under pressure, which means that if something comes into the reactor, there comes a hole in the reactor, cold air comes in and the reaction is immediately stopped. And also, we continuously have to add fuel. We continuously have to pump in new hydrogen. The amount of fuel in the reactor is only a few grams at any moment. So we cannot have the equivalent of a meltdown or a chain reaction. So also that is, let's say, another safety aspect. The third one is important that in contrast to fission, it's basically, I would say, the biggest issue with fusion is that we create a lot of intermediate and low-level waste because the wall of the reactor will become radioactive. But we can choose the materials which lose the radioactivity very quickly, and then typically after 50 or 100 years you can again reuse the materials. I think fusion will be, let's say, a very important ingredient of the energy mix. We need renewables, we need wind, we need solar, we need batteries. But the predictions are that renewables will not be enough to cover the CO2 transition by 2050. There's already many signs that will not happen. And we need a baseload electricity. And the only way to, let's say, do that is to have a baseload electricity source. And if you want to get rid of fusion, nuclear is the only option, whether it would be nuclear fission or nuclear fusion.
Talking about fusion, we are recreating the energies that is powering the stars and our sun in a controlled way inside the reactor. Is this the correct, more or less, definition of what you're trying to do?
Yeah, that's the idea. I very often say that we are trying to create a sun on Earth. That's what we're doing. So the process which powers the sun is fusion energy, and we try to mimic that here on Earth. What we're working on now is to keep the process long enough, to keep it controlled, and also to keep this heat away from any let's say environment, any material, because you can imagine you can make something 150 million degrees, but you cannot simply put it in a metal vessel. You need to have special tricks, and for that we use magnetic fields, because at these very high temperatures all the particles in this very hot gas, they are electrical charged, and electrical charged particles you can basically determine where they move with magnetic fields. So we use a magnetic cage to actually keep these particles floating. So we have this very hot gas which is floating in our machine. We're now working on techniques to control it better, to prevent instabilities to happen, these kind of things. So there's still a lot of research going on.
Can you give us an idea of how many people are needed to study the plasma physics only? So only this part that you mentioned right now, and not all the construction of the rest of the reactor?
Well, actually the reason why EUROfusion has made enormous progress during the last 7 years, when we were established in 2014 at the beginning of Horizon 2020, is thanks to the enormous coordination in the field. So we really coordinate the work of roughly 4,000 scientists and engineers. So not all these people are studying what happens in the hot plasma. There's also engineers which are already working on the design of the next step reactor. There are people which are looking into, let's say, how can we heat the plasma, how can we create these temperatures. Also people who work on how can we control, how can we diagnose, how can we measure how hot it is. You cannot use a super high or a super long thermometer to measure whether it's 150 million degrees. You need fancy laser diagnostics, spectroscopy, all kinds of very fancy techniques. So we have quite a number of people there which are working together to make this progress.
So I think it's already enough for me. All the various technology that you just mentioned, 4,000 people with different expertise, more or less, so contributed to the same project. So can an investor enter in the supply chain? Where? At which point? What can be done?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. And when I started in the field long time ago, I always thought that, let's say, fusion will be interesting for industry and investors once it's working. And we have the technology, so industry which is keen on working with us could basically acquire all the knowledge, and then when the market opens, they are there to deliver. So there's also possibilities. So now as EUROfusion, we are also thinking on how to open up, because we are not a legal entity. We are a consortium of 30 national research institutes in Europe, which are working together on a grant from the European Commission, but we have no legal entity, so we don't have a bank account where an investor can come and say, well, here's some money working on. And so we're now thinking of setting up a small legal entity where at least also investors could come, and that we can bring them in contact with the laboratories which can work together with them. So I would say it would be of mutual benefit, because the extra budget would help to research. At the same time, the industry would get access to intellectual property, potential patents, which will give them a market and also potential very good spin-off in many different fields.
When it will be ready, what's the next steps?
Yeah, so the idea is that ITER will come in operation in 27, 28. Will be full performance around 37, and as said, it will have a 10 times power multiplication, but it will not generate electricity. In EUROfusion, we're working on the following up step, which is what we call demo, the demonstration reactor, which will deliver 500 megawatt electric to the grid. This is net electricity, so we give 500 megawatts more back to the grid than what we take to get these conditions. Can it go faster? Well, it depends very much on the budget. The fusion budget is, let's say, relatively low if you compare it to other energy sources.
Is fusion in need of any more specific regulation?
Yeah, well, this is a very good question. So thank you for that, because I think this is a really very critical point, because the only legislation we have is for nuclear fission reactors. And as I explained before, the risks with nuclear fusion are much less than with nuclear fission. And what we don't want to, let's say, realize is a situation in which fusion is suffocated by regulations which come from fission, which really make working kind of impossible. Of course, with the ITER project in southern France, we are already trying to get this experience. We are also internally within EUROfusion with a working group looking into what are the ways forward. In Europe, we also need to move forward, so we need to have a good idea. And what is very important is that we do this hand in hand with the nuclear legislator, also with the politicians, that we really work together to develop this new legislation, that we can, as soon as fusion reactors come on the market, have developed a framework to, let's say, control them and to make sure that they're really safe. I really appreciate this interview very much, because it gives us the opportunity to indeed interact and to let's say, try to convey the message that we understand each other. And well, then at the end, it's up to the politicians to take the best possible decision.
I would like to really thank you so much, Tonny, for being with us today. It's something that I would really like to stress, that we're talking about science and not fiction. And looking forward to your results at EUROfusion. And thank you once again for being with us.
Thank you very much. And I hope that soon we can show that it's a science fact rather than science fiction. Yes.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.